I stood in the cramped kitchen of my family's home, the stale scent of coffee mingling with the musty smell of rotting wood from the cabinets. My plate peeked out from the sink, still holding a few scraps of mashed potatoes from the dinner I'd eaten standing up, my back pressed against the cold countertop. My mother, Linda Carter, had once told me when I was 19, still stiff in my military uniform, with the fresh pride of youth. "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, sweetheart." She said it gently, as if bestowing a kindness, but those words sliced me in two, leaving a wound that never healed. They became the quiet background melody of my life, echoing through every holiday, every visit home, where my family's gaze always turned to my younger sister, Sarah Carter, the true star of the Carter clan. They never outright called me a failure, but silence can be more terrifying than words. When Sarah got promoted, the family posted on social media as if it were the second coming. But when I returned from a 7-month deployment, leading Black Ops missions across borders no one dared name, not a single family member was at the airport. "You're always so busy," my father, James Carter, said over the phone, as if I'd missed a dentist appointment rather than survived hellish days. At Thanksgiving dinner, my seat was given to the neighbor's son, a kid who'd just been accepted to law school, a big deal. My mother declared. I ate standing by the sink, my medals still tucked in a dusty box in the garage. That night, I told myself I was done. I didn't need their recognition anymore. I'd survived enemy fire. I didn't need to endure my family's indifference. But then, a month ago, I sat in the back row of a command briefing room at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, just to observe, nothing more. The air was thick with names, ranks, and titles that never truly belonged to me. The murmur of officers buzzed like waves crashing, until the door swung open. General Thompson strode in, his gait steady, his sharp eyes scanning the room. And then, he stopped. Right in front of me, he squared his shoulders, stood tall, and his voice rang out, clear and unwavering, "Ma'am, you are General Carter." The room seemed to hold its breath, not for Sarah, not for anyone else, for me. That moment wasn't sweet. It was sharp, like a blade, cutting through years of invisibility, shattering them in a single breath. I felt every eye on me, not with admiration, but with confusion, as if they'd just uncovered a buried truth. I didn't hold my head high out of pride, but because, for the first time, I wasn't ashamed to claim my space. Yet deep inside, I still heard my mother's voice. Not everyone is meant to be exceptional. Those words had once been chains, but now they were just a faint echo against the truth unfolding before me. I am Emily Carter, who led troops through fire, held the hands of dying soldiers in the dust, and made decisions that kept me awake at night. But the hardest thing I ever did wasn't facing the enemy. It was surviving the invisibility in my own home. Fort Campbell isn't just a military base. It's the religion of our family, a place where discipline and expectations seep into every breath. My father, Colonel James Carter, retired with the aura of a model soldier. My mother, Linda, a former field nurse, wore her silence like another medal. Sarah, my younger sister, is on track to become a lieutenant colonel, and the family kneels at the altar of her success. And me, I'm the shadow, the forgotten one, the one they thought gave up her dreams because she wasn't strong enough. But they don't know I never gave up. I was forced to disappear, to protect secrets even my family wasn't allowed to know. The moment General Thompson called my name, I didn't just feel recognition. I felt the weight of what America stands for, the courage to stand tall, even when those closest to you turn away. It's the fight against the injustice of assumptions, of whispers that you're not good enough, not worthy enough. I fought on distant battlefields, but the battle in my own heart, the battle to be seen, was the fiercest of all. I need to know you're listening. Leave a comment, say you're there, or tell me where you're reading this story from. A small sign that I'm not alone will help me keep telling this truth, louder and clearer. Because sometimes, knowing someone out there is listening is enough to make you dare to speak. This is my story, but it's also the story of anyone who's been pushed into the shadows by those who were supposed to lift them up. And if it resonates with you, consider sharing it so this truth can travel further. My story didn't begin the moment General Thompson called my name in that stifling briefing room. It began long before, in the years I was erased from the Carter family narrative, not with words, but with a silence as sharp as a knife. When I left Fort Campbell after that fateful day, my heart was heavy not because of the confused stares of the officers or the whispers rippling through the auditorium, but because I knew, deep down, that my family, those who were supposed to be my safest haven, would never understand the truth. They had built a myth around Sarah, the perfect younger sister, and in that myth, I was just a shadow, a failure who abandoned her military dreams because she lacked the courage. But the truth was different. The truth was a dark, thorny path I was forced to walk alone. When I was 20, just finishing my first year at West Point, I didn't drop out as my family believed. I was summoned to a nameless, numberless office deep inside a concrete building in Virginia. A man with cold eyes and no uniform handed me a file stamped in red. "You've been chosen," he said, his voice flat, like he was reading a menu. "But if you accept, your life as you know it ends." That was the doorway to a covert intelligence program, one that didn't officially exist, with no graduation ceremony, no medals, no photos on the wall. I signed my name, not for glory, but because I believed this country, America, which I swore to protect, needed people willing to vanish to keep it safe. For the next 20 years, I lived in the shadows. I once crouched in a damp bunker in Damascus, Syria, for 6 months, my ear glued to a listening device, decoding signals that could save or kill hundreds. I hid inside the walls of a hostage compound in Libya, 4 days without sleep, coordinating a rescue that brought 30 civilians home. And during Operation Candlestrike, a name that still makes me shudder, I lost 3 soldiers under my command, young men with radiant smiles, and a piece of my soul remains lost in that desert. I came back from those places, but I never came home. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. Those stories aren't told, aren't recorded, aren't etched on stone. They live only in the nightmares that jolt me awake at 3 a.m, cold sweat dripping down my forehead. My family knew none of this. To them, I was the quitter, the older sister who lacked the discipline to follow the prestigious Carter family path. 3 generations tied to the military like a religion. My father, Colonel James Carter, looked at me with disappointment when I left West Point, as if I'd betrayed not just him but the family legacy. My mother, Linda, with the sharp silence of a field nurse, never asked where I went or what I did. Sarah, the little sister who used to chase me across the Fort Campbell lawns, is now the shining star, on the cusp of becoming a lieutenant colonel, and every step of her ascent was another knife carving my invisibility deeper. They thought I worked a desk job somewhere, maybe at a veteran's office, better than nothing, as a relative once said with a pitying smile. But I never stopped loving them, even when that love hurt like an open wound. I sent birthday flowers to my mother, Christmas cards to my father with a fake Maryland address, small gifts to remind them I still existed. I watched from afar as Sarah advanced, as my brother married on the base chapel lawn, as their lives unfolded like neat, public chapters. I wasn't in that picture. Once, a cousin mentioned that in a family photo, I'd been cropped out to balance the frame. That comment didn't make me cry. It just felt like the air was sucked out of my chest. My truth is a secret sealed in blood and red ink, but it's also the fire that kept me alive. I fought not just external enemies, but internal biases, the whispers that women like me didn't belong on the battlefield, that I wasn't strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the men at the base. Every mission was a declaration of war against injustice, not just from enemies, but from a system that sometimes wanted to sideline me. The America I served isn't just green hills or a waving flag. It's the ideal that anyone, no matter how dismissed or forgotten, can stand up and make a difference. Then one day, the phone rang. My mother's voice, Linda, came through the line, sharp as a nurse reading a chart. Sarah's been promoted. You should come. No questions, no warmth, just a cold warning. Don't wear anything strange. Don't embarrass your sister. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white, not out of anger, but because a small, naive spark of hope still flickered in me that maybe, just once, they'd see the real me, not the shadow they'd painted. I replied, my voice even, I'll be there, not to beg for their love, not to flaunt the scars I wasn't allowed to show. I came because I needed to know if, in the right light, they could see that they'd misjudged me all these years. That night, I stood before the mirror, staring at my face-sharp eyes, lines around my mouth from too many desert dawns. A face no longer young, but not yet old, just resolute. I whispered to my reflection, it's almost time. I didn't know if I was talking about forgiveness or letting the silence finally speak. The mirror in my old bedroom at Fort Campbell reflected a woman I barely recognized. My eyes, sharpened by sleepless nights in the desert, stared back with quiet resolve. But behind them was a storm, a mix of naive hope and the pain that had honed me over 2 decades. I told myself I'd return, not to beg for my family's love, but to face them, to see if they could look past the shadow they'd cast over me. But as I stepped off the plane, the humid Kentucky air wrapped around me like a reminder this house was never truly home. I drove through Fort Campbell's familiar roads, once my childhood playground, where Sarah and I raced across the green lawns, laughing under the shadow of a waving flag. Now, every corner held a painful memory. I parked by the logistics fence, gravel crunching under my boots, as if the ground itself whispered that it remembered me, even if my family didn't. The Carter family house loomed ahead pale beige, the porch swing weathered, the American flag still proudly flying. I pushed the door open, the smell of lemon cleaner and old books flooding my senses, pulling me back to the days I was a girl dreaming of glory. My mother, Linda, stood in the dining room, meticulously arranging name cards on the table. She didn't look up as I entered, only said, her voice sharp as a blade, "Go change. You and Sarah will sit together, but don't interrupt your sister's speech tomorrow. No greeting, no hug, no acknowledgement that I'd driven 10 hours to be here. Just orders, as if I were a raw recruit needing correction." I stood there, gripping the strap of my bag, feeling like a child scolded for spilling juice. But I wasn't that child anymore. I was Emily Carter, who'd survived battlefields my mother only saw on the news, and I hadn't come to be commanded. My father, James, entered the room, carrying the air of a colonel nearing early retirement. He clapped my shoulder, a touch more collegial than familial. "Good, you made it," he said. But his eyes slid past me, toward the room beyond, as if I were a temporary obstruction. I swallowed the ache in my chest, telling myself I didn't need their attention. But God, it still hurt. Then Sarah appeared, like a princess in her crisp navy uniform, gleaming with perfectly polished rank bars. She glided through the room, kissing hands, charming everyone with her practiced smile. When her eyes finally met mine, she waved, her voice light but sharp as a knife. "This is my sister, Emily. She was in the military for a while. Works in admin now, I think." Laughter followed, gentle, polite, but it cut deeper than any overt insult. A cousin leaned in, whispering, "So what do you do now, Veterans Office better than nothing, right?" I smiled, not showing teeth, just enough to let the comment die. I didn't respond. There's a dignity in silence, especially when your truth is locked behind classified seals. The dinner before the ceremony was a small affair, just family and a few close officers. Sarah played the perfect host, graceful and calculated. Every eye was on her, as if she were the sun and we were merely planets in her orbit. At one point, someone praised her poise. Sarah smiled, sipped her wine, and said, her voice light as a breeze, "I've been practicing my speech. I want everyone to know you don't have to give up on something to realize you were wrong." The room stilled, just for a moment. But I felt the invisible blade, named for me, aimed straight at my heart. I said nothing, not because I had no retort, but because I knew the truth. When it chose to speak, would be louder than any comeback. After dinner, I stepped onto the porch, leaving the laughter and chatter behind. The night air was cool, carrying the distant sound of a brass band practicing somewhere on the base. I sat on the steps, watching the wind rustle the trees, my heart heavy but not broken. Tomorrow I'd sit quietly, let Sarah have her moment. But deep down, I knew the truth had a voice of its own. And when it spoke, no one, not even Sarah, could silence it. The house behind me glowed with light, but I felt like I stood in darkness, as I always had in my family's eyes. This isn't just my story, it's the story of every American who's been pushed to the margins by those they love, misjudged by rigid assumptions. In a country built on the ideal of freedom, the greatest injustice sometimes comes not from enemies, but from those we call family. I didn't come here to defeat them. I came to remind myself that I deserve to be seen not through medals or titles, but through the invisible scars I carry, each one a testament to my courage. The night before Sarah's promotion ceremony, I sat on the porch steps, listening to the distant brass band blend with the wind rustling the trees. Sarah's words from dinner echoed in me, sharp as an arrow aimed true. You don't have to give up on something to realize you were wrong. She didn't say my name, but I felt the weight of her words, like a verdict meant for me, the failure, the quitter, the faint shadow beside her radiant glory. I took a deep breath, letting Fort Campbell's cold air fill my lungs, telling myself that tomorrow I'd stay silent, let Sarah have her moment. But inside, I knew the truth, like a suppressed flame, needed only a spark to ignite. The next morning, the Grand Hall at Fort Campbell loomed like a cathedral of military power. Rows of chairs were aligned by rank, light from brass chandeliers spilling down like a halo. I sat 3 rows from the back, wedged between a young woman, likely an officer's fiancé, and an older aunt reeking of heavy perfume. A small sign before our row read, "Unspecified family." The military's cold way of saying you're present, but no one really cares. I wore a simple beige blouse and fitted slacks, deliberately chosen to avoid attention. But inside, I could still feel my old uniform carefully folded in my suitcase, whispering, reminding me who I truly am. Sarah stood at the podium, resplendent in her navy uniform, light glinting off her polished rank bars. The American flag stood tall to her left, her gleaming boots to her right. She spoke of loyalty, perseverance, and what made my hands clench, the importance of steering clear of those who've betrayed the sacred trust of the uniform. Each word was a knife, aimed not just at me, but at what I'd sacrificed, the sleepless nights in darkness, the decisions that haunted me, the soldiers I couldn't save. I kept my face still, eyes forward, but inside, a storm was raging. The audience applauded after each of Sarah's lines, but I noticed a few glances my way, a few whispers weaving through the rows. A young officer leaned over, muttering to his neighbor, "She looks familiar." Where have I seen her? I didn't move, didn't let them see even a flicker of reaction. I'd learned long ago how to hide myself, not out of fear, but because my truth didn't need to shout to exist. Then the hall's doors swung open. General Thompson strode in, his walk steady but carrying a force that seemed to tighten the room. He scanned the crowd, and his eyes locked on me. Time slowed. I felt my heart beat, not faster, but heavier, like a drum before a battle. He walked straight toward me, his polished shoes clicking on the wood floor. Standing before me, he stopped, heels snapping together, and saluted crisply. "Ma'am," his voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "General Carter, it's an honor to see you again." The hall seemed to lose its air. The applause for Sarah died. Her voice, mid-speech, faltered, breaking on an unfinished sentence. I saw her hand grip her note cards, trembling like a leaf in a storm. My mother, Linda, in the front row, dropped her glass, the shatter of crystal ringing like a gunshot in the silence. My father, James, stood reflexively, then sank back into his seat, as if trying to vanish into the cushioned chair. A young officer behind me whispered, not quietly enough, "Is that her, the one who led Operation Dagger?" I stood, not because I craved attention, but because I couldn't let the man who'd trusted me with the lives of hundreds stand alone in that respect. I returned the salute, my movement precise, as I'd done thousands of times in the darkness of nameless battlefields. My eyes locked with General Thompson's, not with pride, but with a silent vow, I'm here, and I won't hide anymore. Sarah tried to resume her speech, but her voice trembled, her eyes darting across the room as if searching for an anchor. But the energy had shifted. The eyes weren't on her anymore. They were on me, or worse, on the gap between what they thought they knew and what they now realized was wrong. The ceremony ended in polite applause, but the air remained heavy, like smoke after a contained fire. I felt the tension, not as a victory, but as a crack in the wall my family had built around me. As people began to leave, Sarah intercepted me near the exit. No congratulations, no smile. Her eyes flashed with anger, her voice a sharp whisper. "Why didn't you say anything? You let me stand there like a fool. Was that your plan?" I looked at her, not with bitterness, but with a clarity forged in years of darkness. "Sarah," I said, my voice even, "if you need the truth to shrink to feel tall, you've never truly stood upright." Her lips tightened, her eyes blinking fast as if holding something back. I stepped past her, my heels echoing on the polished wood floor, each step a declaration that I was no longer anyone's shadow. This time, as I left, I didn't feel the invisible mocking eyes behind me. Instead, I sensed confusion, doubt, and above all, the trembling of an order my family had built on lies and assumptions. That moment wasn't just about me. It was about every American who's been pushed to the margins, misjudged by those who didn't bother to look deeper. In a country that celebrates freedom and justice, injustice sometimes comes not from external enemies, but from internal biases from family, community, even the system we serve. General Thompson didn't just recognize me. He broke an invisible wall, reminding me that America's true strength lies in those who dare to stand, even when they stand alone. I walked out of the hall, Kentucky sunlight blazing on my shoulders, and for the first time, I felt I didn't just exist, I belonged. The Kentucky sunlight still burned on my shoulders as I left the hall, but inside, a storm was churning. Sarah's accusation, "You let me stand there like a fool," echoed in my mind. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed a bitter truth. She wasn't just jealous of my unexpected moment. She was afraid of it. I walked through Fort Campbell's main gate, feeling like I was leaving a battlefield, but the real fight was only beginning. I didn't return to the Carter family house, where name cards and cold glances awaited. Instead, I drove to the military guest quarters, a sparse room with beige walls and a stiff bed, designed for transient visitors quickly forgotten. I tossed my keys on the desk, kicked off my shoes, and then my eyes caught something out of place, a plain manila envelope. Centered on the desk, no name, no seal, no handwriting. It was just there, as if it had been waiting for me. I opened it, my hand slightly trembling not from fear, but from a gut feeling that whatever was inside would change everything. Inside was a printout of an email sent 2 years ago. No sender information, only forwarded through an encrypted server. The subject: reckless operation, civilian casualties. The content accused someone named Emily C., clearly me, of leading an unsanctioned mission that caused multiple civilian deaths. The call was to a progressive military blog, urging them to expose the rot within. Reading those words, I felt like I was staring at a death sentence drafted by someone else. The language was cold, but strangely familiar. I recognized it almost word for word from a classified after-action report I'd reviewed in an armored bunker in Stuttgart. That report was accessible to only 3 people: me, the lead analyst, and a junior officer with peripheral clearance, Sarah. Her name flashed in my mind like a bell, not because I wanted to believe it, but because I couldn't help but think of her. The pieces started to fit 2 years ago. I'd been flagged in a brief internal investigation, supposedly triggered by an automated system detecting anomalous data. The case was dropped in days, and I'd believed it was a glitch. But now, I realized someone had deliberately left smoke after extinguishing the fire. I sat on the hard chair in the guest room, the envelope still clutched in my hand. Sarah, the little sister who used to chase me across Fort Campbell's lawns, who cried when I left for West Point, had become the author of this indictment, not because she wanted to destroy me, but because she wanted me gone entirely. Jealousy, I realized, isn't just an emotion, it's a knife, and Sarah had wielded it with a soldier's precision. But the storm in me barely had time to settle when a shrill alarm pierced the air. Not the morning bugle, but an urgent, adrenaline-pumping sound. My phone lit up with a notification: emergency protocol activated. All senior personnel report to command center. I had no time to question. Military instinct took over. I pulled on my uniform, laced my boots, and rushed out, the manila envelope stuffed into my jacket pocket. Fort Campbell's hallways were a controlled chaos. Officers jogged past, some still pulling on boots, others already at blinking screens. A grim-faced sergeant stopped me at the operations room door, handing me a thin but heavy file. A leak? A classified document tied to Operation Dagger, the mission I'd led in Syria's shadows, had been posted to an encrypted dark web forum. The leak happened 3 hours ago, and digital traces pointed to an internal IP address, specifically a decommissioned device still in the base's system, once assigned to me. I felt like I'd woken up in a nightmare I didn't sign up for. Within 30 minutes, I sat across from General Thompson and 2 officials from Military Intelligence Command. The room was colder than its actual temperature. They didn't say I was under arrest, but their eyes said I was a suspect. They demanded all my communications from the past 6 months. I didn't argue. I handed over everything: emails, texts, call logs. But in my mind, I was back with the manila envelope. With Sarah's email, I knew they were connected, the way a soldier senses a trap before it springs. Late that night, with access to agency tools, I analyzed the email's metadata from the envelope. The routing traced to a defunct link to an automated backup server, once used for mission logs. That server was supposedly offline, but the anonymous sender's link had inadvertently triggered a dormant process, pulling up a hidden file with high-level classified data now floating on the web. A careless mistake, but not random. When I traced the email's originating device, it had been logged into 2 days earlier using Sarah's credentials. Records showed she'd been at the base late, preparing for training, and I recalled her mentioning, with an odd tone, that she'd left her laptop at the comm station overnight, unlocked, unguarded. I stared at the screen, my heart heavy as lead. Sarah, the girl who cried when I left, was now part of the digital trail to this leak. I didn't want to believe she'd sabotaged me intentionally, but her actions, whether driven by jealousy or carelessness, had opened a crack someone exploited. I was about to dig deeper when a knock broke my thoughts. My father, James, stood at the threshold, looking older than I remembered. No longer the stern colonel, but a father with fear in his eyes. He didn't greet me, just asked, his voice a near whisper. "Is it true? Did you leak it?" I met his gaze, unflinching. There was no anger in his eyes, just worry for me, for the family's reputation, and perhaps for the faith he'd placed in the concept of honor. "You don't have to believe me," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I'll prove the truth, not for me, but for those who still trust this system with their lives." He nodded, saying nothing more, then turned away. His silhouette faded down the hallway, leaving me with a feeling both painful and resolute. This wasn't just a fight for my honor. It was a fight against betrayal, not just from Sarah, but from a system that sometimes turns loyalty into a weapon to destroy those who dare to stand. The America I serve isn't a place where mistakes like this get buried. I tucked the envelope into my pocket, took a deep breath, and prepared for the next battle, not with guns, but with truth. My father's silhouette fading down the guest house hallway left a heavy silence, like the calm before a storm. His question, "Did you leak?" It wasn't an accusation, but a wound. Proof that even he, who taught me to tie knots and shoot a rifle, doubted me. But I had no time to dwell in the pain. The manila envelope in my jacket pocket felt like it was burning, a reminder that the truth, however painful, was my only weapon. I returned to the room, the computer screen still glowing with Sarah's email trace data, and decided this fight wouldn't end in silence. Not this time. The next morning, I stood before General Thompson in the strategy briefing room, the air frigid despite the air conditioning being off. I requested to lead the internal investigation into the classified leak. It was a bold, almost unorthodox move, but I still held covert reserve status and enough clearance to act. More importantly, I had a motive no one else did to uncover the truth. Not just to save my honor, but to protect the system I'd spent my life serving. General Thompson listened, his eyes never leaving mine, as if weighing every word. Then he stood, slowly circled the table, and extended his hand. "General Carter," he said, his voice low but firm, "the floor is yours." I stepped into the command briefing room, a place that once excluded me from my rank, now open out of necessity. Across from me were representatives from the Military Investigative Bureau and Base Security Command, their faces stone cold, notebooks open but blank. I laid out my hypothesis, my voice even unemotional. The leak wasn't deliberate sabotage, but a chain of dominoes, reckless decisions, and cascading errors. Starting with Sarah's email, I presented the metadata, system traces, and a digital trail from her email to the leaked classified file. They didn't challenge my logic, but what they did was worse. General Thompson assigned an internal task force, not of outside experts, but of my own family. I was tasked as lead analyst and field coordinator. My father, Colonel James Carter, would oversee old campaign intelligence archives, leveraging limited access from his post-retirement advisory role. Sarah was assigned to trace system vulnerabilities and internal access points. My mother, Linda, with her field nurse background and secondary expertise in biometric traces, would assist in recovering data from the laptop left in the tech bay. It wasn't an investigation team, it was a play, where each actor knew their role, but no one wanted to share the stage. The task force's first meeting was as cold as a morgue. My father opened with a presentation, eyes glued to the screen, voice dry as if reading an obituary. Sarah delivered her part, brief, efficient, but soulless, never looking up. Only my mother occasionally glanced between us, as if watching her children become strangers. I wasn't there for warmth. I was there for results, and I wouldn't let family fractures block the path. Then came the breakthrough. While analyzing a storage node tied to Sarah's server scans, our security AI detected a Trojan buried in a 2017 campaign archive, never activated, lying dormant in a logistics files shell. The date stopped me cold, 2017. That was the year I clashed with Michael Reed, a fellow strategist during a joint operation in Mosul. He wanted to carpet bomb civilian areas to eliminate hostiles. I blocked it, demanding a phased containment strategy. It was the right call, but it made me a thorn in his side, a symbol of what he saw as bureaucratic weakness. Michael wasn't just a grudge holder. He'd had temporary encryption access to campaign servers. If he planted the Trojan, then it could have lain dormant until someone like Sarah accidentally triggered it. My mother quietly handed me a folder from Operation Candlestrike, her eyes soft but heavy. "You left this behind when you went away," she said. "Back then, I thought you were running. Now I think you were just trying to survive in silence." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Her words weren't an apology, but an acknowledgement, raw and profound. I smiled, not out of pride, but because something had shifted, like a door creaking open after years of being locked. That night, our system flagged a login from a remote IP, attempting to wipe logs tied to the initial leak. The location, a motel just outside Fort Campbell, booked for 3 days with cash. The name on the receipt, Michael Reed. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Sarah or my family anymore. There was someone out there, cunning, patient, and ready to exploit our cracks as his cover. The raid on the abandoned tech bunker hit like a storm, silent at first, then sharp and electric. Under emergency authority, we surrounded the site with strategic precision. Michael Reed was there, in an old data relay room, still wired to the auxiliary military network. He was uploading a compressed data packet when we burst in. He didn't resist, didn't flinch, just looked at me and said, his voice calm, "Took you long enough." "Emily." In the interrogation room, Michael laid it all out, not with arrogance, but with clarity, like a soldier reporting a mission. "I didn't want to take you down publicly," he said. "Just wanted you out of the room. The leak was meant to make you a liability. Once your clearance was stripped, no more NATO, no more front row seats at strategy briefings." His voice was bitter. He'd nursed his grudge from Mosul, turning it into a meticulous plan, exploiting Sarah's mistake to ignite the leak. He didn't break us, he just watched us fracture, then planted his flag. When Sarah read Michael's confession, she sat still, eyes glued to the page, as if willing the words to rearrange into a less brutal story. After a moment, she said, "Not looking at me, I didn't know what I did would lead to this." I crossed my arms, replying, "Sometimes we burn a dry field out of jealousy, forgetting someone sleeping in the grass." Her face twitched, but she held firm, as Sarah always did, pried her armor for her guilt. The next day, in the final report, Sarah submitted an addendum. She took full responsibility for starting the email chain that led to Michael's leak. Though not criminally prosecuted, she accepted a formal reprimand, trading away her promotion chances for the next 5 years. She signed it without being asked. It didn't feel like a victory. It was just an ending and a beginning. The final task force meeting was silent, but this time, not cold. Sarah didn't avoid my eyes anymore. When my father stood to give closing remarks, he paused, then said, his voice hoarse, "I owe this team an apology, especially Emily. I let medals and pride obscure what really matters." It was the first time I'd heard him admit fault, in a room full of senior officers. I didn't cry. Sarah didn't either. But when our eyes met, I no longer saw the rival who tried to erase me. I saw a woman learning to stand tall without pushing others down. This wasn't just my victory. It was a victory for the American ideal that truth, buried by jealousy or abuse of power, will always find its way to the light. Michael Reed wasn't just a traitor. He was a symbol of those who exploit division to manipulate, and my family, with its fractures, had unwittingly aided him. But we rose, not as perfect individuals, but as Americans who believe justice is worth fighting for, even when it hurts. My father's apology in the command briefing room lingered in me, not because it erased years of being overlooked, but because it was a crack in the wall of pride the Carter family had built around me. As the task force disbanded, I walked out of Fort Campbell, the early autumn air cool against my skin, carrying the scent of golden leaves and memories. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt lighter, not because my family had changed, but because I'd learned to let go of the weight of invisibility. But my story wasn't over. It was shifting to a new chapter, where truth wasn't just revealed, but shared, like a flame passed from hand to hand. Weeks later, I stood behind a lectern at a regional strategy conference at Fort Campbell. The banner behind me read, "Redefining Shadow Warfare, Post-Conflict Intelligence in Asymmetric Environments." 62 commanders, 30 senior advisors, and nearly 100 observers sat before me, their names gleaming on chest badges. Among them, in the second row, was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Carter, her name neatly listed under Field Training Officer. I'd personally sent her the invitation. No explanation, just a brief note. "It's time you learn what you thought I didn't know." The hall's lights dimmed. I stepped to the lectern. No entourage, no pomp, just a laser pointer and a lifetime of invisible scars. I began with the simplest truth. Some missions are never named. Some leaders are never medaled. And some battles don't start at borders, they start where judgment replaces understanding. I saw heads tilt slightly, eyes glinting with curiosity. Officers who once echoed Sarah's criticisms of me now looked at me with new respect, as if redrawing a mischarted map. Mid-speech, I turned to an unpublicized piece of Operation Candlestrike. For the first time in open record, I revealed a decision I made alone on the battlefield. I signed an override order to spare a hostile zone because 7 children were trapped inside. That order nearly ended my career. "I'd make that call again," I said, my voice steady but firm. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because truth doesn't need forgiveness. It just needs to be seen. A collective gasp rippled through the room, not for drama, but for clarity. War isn't just about territory, it's a moral terrain. And leadership isn't about being right, it's about being willing to carry the weight of choice. Sarah sat there, back straight, pen hovering over her notebook, eyes locked on me. She didn't blink, didn't fidget, and I knew this time she was truly listening. When I finished, I stepped to the side microphone and said, "To close, I invite Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Carter to share her thoughts as a next-generation officer." Sarah rose slowly, her voice steady, not perfect, but sincere. Her eyes glistened, but her shoulders were square. I grew up thinking rank was the ultimate goal, that whoever stood tallest was heard. She said, "But today, I learned that true honor is knowing who you can learn from, and having the courage to admit it." The room stood and applauded, not just for me, but for something greater, the idea that strength can be quiet, that leadership can be taught by those we once envied, and that learning, even in uniform, never truly ends. In the back row, my mother, Linda, sat with her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't clap, but she nodded. For the first time, it felt like recognition, not for my rank, but for my journey. After the conference, I hosted a dinner at the old Carter family house, once a battlefield of invisible wounds. I arrived early, setting the table myself, and chose to sit at the head, the spot my father always claimed. When they entered, my father, mother, and Sarah, no one spoke. My mother carried a foil-covered dish, Sarah avoided my eyes, and my father wore an unreadable expression. I didn't start with pleasantries. I didn't call this dinner to apologize. I said, my voice clear. I called it to tell my truth, for the first time, in my own words. And so I began. I told them I didn't quit the military. I was recruited into intelligence. I spoke of 3 days held underground in Iraq after a withdrawal route was exposed by a double agent. I described the order I gave to destroy a supply cache, saving an Australian recon team, which injured 3 civilians lightly and led to an 8-month investigation, ultimately clearing me. I shared that I declined a medal for a covert relief mission in Syria, as accepting it would have strained diplomatic ties. I chose silence over glory. The room seemed to hold its breath. My mother's eyes welled with tears. Sarah stared at her plate. My father sat motionless, hands clasped before him. Then he asked, so softly I almost missed it, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I met his gaze. "Because you never asked. And if you had, I didn't think you'd believe me." It wasn't an attack, just the truth, raw and sharp. My mother whispered, "I thought the packages you sent were your way of apologizing." I shook my head. They weren't apologies. They were reminders that I still existed, even when I was erased from every family photo. I pulled a manila folder from under the table, sliding it across to Sarah. Inside was the printout of the email she sent 2 years ago, nearly ruining my career. "I didn't keep this to accuse you," I said. "I kept it to remind you that invisible words can be as deadly as bullets." Sarah stood, walked to my side, and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. No words. My father rose, went to the family shelf, and picked up a photo from a long-ago summer barbecue. He studied it. "This one's missing someone," he said. "We'll take a new one." I didn't smile. I just nodded, not because I'd forgiven, but because I no longer needed to hold on to what hurt me. Time passed, and I returned to Washington, D.C., resuming my role as a NATO strategic advisor. But once a month, I went back to Fort Campbell, standing before a special class on soft strategy in modern warfare. Sarah was always there, front row, asking the toughest questions, challenging me, sometimes arguing, and occasionally falling silent when I spoke of missions that once pitted us against each other. One afternoon after class, she handed me a thin file, a proposed training reform based on concepts I'd introduced. "I don't need your signature," she said. "I just want to know what you think." I wrote one word on the cover: proceed. Our family now moves in a quiet rhythm. My mother sends handwritten letters monthly, often just a line: "Are you eating enough?" My father started telling friends his daughter advises at a high strategic level, no longer just somewhere overseas. We haven't taken the new photo yet, but the next time I looked at the picture on the mantle, I was in it, not replaced, not erased. This story isn't just about me or the Carter family. It's about America, a place where truth, buried by jealousy or injustice, can be unearthed by those who dare to dig. I fought not just Michael Reed or my family's misconceptions, but a system that sometimes turns loyalty into a tool to silence people like me. But I stand here, not as a hero, but as an American who believes justice is worth the cost, and healing, however slow, is proof of our strength. The family dinner at the old Carter house changed something in me, not because it erased the scars, but because it taught me those scars don't define me. As I left Fort Campbell, Kentucky's golden sunlight painted a path ahead, not to a home, but to a place I belonged. One I'd built myself, not on medals or family recognition, but on the truth I'd fought to protect. I returned to Washington, D.C., to my small apartment overlooking the Potomac, where my life remained simple but purposeful, up at 5:30 a.m. Reports in black ink. No text answered after 9 p.m. But something had shifted. I was no longer my own shadow. Each month, I returned to Fort Campbell, standing before the soft strategy class, where young officers and Sarah listened as I shared battles unrecorded in history books. Sarah was always in the front row, pen hovering over her notebook, her eyes no longer glinting with competition, but with curiosity, sometimes respect. One afternoon after class, as the sunset bathed the barracks in gold, she appeared beside me, holding a plastic box with a small birthday cake. She handed it to me with a half smile, not the confident grin of a lieutenant colonel, but the smile of a little sister. On the blue frosting, 3 words were scrawled: General, Sister, Teacher. I looked at her, said nothing, just nodded, and in that moment, I felt an invisible thread reconnect, not perfect, but enough to hold us together. Sarah isn't just my student, she's becoming a better version of herself, asking hard questions, challenging old assumptions, and learning to stand tall without pushing others down. My mother, Linda, keeps sending handwritten letters, sometimes just a line, "Are you wearing enough layers?" My father, James, now tells friends about my daughter, the high-level strategic advisor, his voice free of hesitation. The family photo on the mantle now includes me, not cropped, not replaced. It's not a miracle, just a beginning, a promise that from now on, I'll be seen. But my story isn't just about the Carter family. It's about America, a nation built on the ideal that no one is left behind. That truth, buried by jealousy, bias, or abuse of power, will always find its way to the light. I fought Michael Reed, my family's lies, and a system that sometimes sought to silence people like me. But each battle was a reminder that America's true strength isn't in military might, but in the courage of those who dare to stand, even when they stand alone. One evening, after a lecture at Fort Campbell, a young cadet, maybe 23, stayed behind. He stood there, hands clasped, voice trembling. "Ma'am, in war, what's the hardest thing?" I paused, looked into his clear eyes, and gave the only truth I knew: surviving without turning to stone, without turning your wounds into weapons. He nodded, as if the answer had unlocked a door in his soul. I watched him leave, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't just teaching strategy, I was passing on the flame of resilience, the belief that everyone, no matter how overlooked, has the power to rewrite their story. As I walked down the path behind the barracks, the sunset casting an orange-gold glow over me, I thought about my journey. I was once a girl told by her mother that not everyone is meant to be exceptional. I was once a shadow, erased from my family's picture, but I chose to stay, to fight, to turn my scars into stories. That's the American spirit, not never falling, but always rising, always moving forward, always carrying the light of truth. I need to hear your thoughts. If this story touched you, leave a comment, share what moved you. Every voice matters, and yours is no exception. Because in a country built on freedom, nothing is more powerful than someone who dares to speak, and nothing is more sacred than someone who listens. This story is a testament to a truth: when power goes too far, when jealousy or injustice tries to smother the truth, one person standing up can rewrite the rules. It reminds us that America isn't just a land, it's an ideal, where every individual, no matter how dismissed or forgotten, has the strength to shape the future. The lesson for you is this: never let anyone silence your voice. Fight, persist, because that's the American way, standing tall, even when the world wants you to bow.